chair of the Potomac Watershed Roundtable, and I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is our quarterly meeting, and we have an agenda that is not quite as lengthy as the agendas when we actually included lunch and we were all in person. But we do have an interesting agenda, and we will have plenty of time for discussion, which is one of the reasons the roundtable was founded in the first place, was to be able to have those discussions among the localities and the representatives of the localities. So I think since everybody is on virtually, they can see in the people icon who's here. So we will not go around the room, so to speak, and introduce everybody. But I would like to know, is there anyone on the line now who is new to the roundtable, whom we perhaps have not met before, other than our guest speakers? Is there anyone who has not attended a roundtable meeting before? Okay, very good. We have the minutes from the January 14th meeting that were included in the agenda that was sent to you. Does anyone have any corrections or additions to the minutes? If not, may I have a motion to approve the minutes as submitted?
I move the minutes be approved as submitted.
Thank you, John. Is there a second?
Second, Robert Pickett.
Thank you, Robert. Any discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? Thank you. Those minutes will be for the record. We'll put them in the files so that we've got a good recapture of what we did at that particular meeting. We do have some updates. I have some updates from the chair, but you know, John, I think I'd like to flip this one and have you give updates as the Potomac Council chair, and then I'll go into my report. Do you mind?
Thank you, Chairman Penny. I'd be glad to do that. The council did have a short meeting this morning, and we discussed our finances. We started out this year as of January 1st with $17,966.65 in the bank. We've only spent through March $2,285.50, and most of that expense was administrative, financial, and website management because we haven't done much else. So currently we have in the bank $15,681.15, which is a good financial report. Rebecca Shoemaker was our liaison with DEQ, was with us this morning and talked a little bit about the grant that we hope to get again and the administrative things that we need to do to comply with that grant. So we were glad to have Rebecca with us. I think she's still on now. And the other thing that I would report from the council, I'll be sending out a letter to each of the 6 soil and water conservation districts that started the roundtable and reminding them that they need to appoint one of their directors as a member of the Potomac Watershed Roundtable Council. The council itself provides administrative support to the roundtable. And those 6 soil and water conservation districts are John Marshall, Loudon, Northern Neck, Northern Virginia, Prince William, and Tri-County City. So the note will go to the chairman of the board and to the district managers, executive directors, administrators, reminding them that they need to appoint one of their directors to be a member of the Potomac Council and also an alternate. The alternate doesn't have to be a director, but the member does. And I think that was that comprises our report, Chairman Gross.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for John? Any questions for John? Please, you know, I know that people like to use the little hand icon, but I would prefer if people want to ask a question, just speak up and identify yourself. That it's helpful for me because sometimes I don't see the little hand. I have a number of comments to make in my updates from the chair. And the first thing I wanted to mention was that we need to determine when we might resume our in-person meetings. I think everybody is anxious to see and meet in person, even though we are finding virtual to be very efficient because we don't have to get in our vehicles and drive somewhere. But I think we lose something in, that not having that interpersonal connection. And so I'd like the members of the roundtable to think about when we might resume in-person meetings. Our next meeting is in July, and then I think we have one in October. So, is summertime too soon? Should we wait into the fall? But I'd like to throw that out there for you to think about. Perhaps other organizations that you belong to and how they are doing it, because I really do think it would be helpful for us to have at least some meetings in person. We might want to do a couple meetings virtually and a couple meetings in person each year, but we need to figure that out. So that's a thought for all of you. And I have reports in two different categories. I have one on what is being done in the region to the local government advisory committee, but then I also want to talk about the roundtable itself and some things that I think we need to start taking a look at and doing some work over the next year. So let me start with the local government advisory committee that I serve on as a gubernatorial appointment. Their most recent meeting was a hybrid meeting. I attended virtually, but they were met in Annapolis on March 17th and 18th. So it's just been about 3 weeks since they met. It was a 2-day meeting, and there were a number of presentations, especially on tree cover, and also a lot on technical assistance and funding opportunities through the Corps of Engineers, the American Rescue Plan, and Department of Defense, which is not something we normally think about, but the Department of Defense is getting quite involved in making sure that their military bases are resilient. So one of those areas that we've been looking at the Northern Virginia Regional Commission and the military partnership, community military partnership that I also chair, is looking at what Fort Belvoir and Quantico especially are doing, and they're of course in the Roundtable area, what they're doing because they front on the Potomac River. And so they have a number of issues for flooding and other resiliency that I think perhaps I should invite somebody from the bases to address the roundtable at some point in the future, because a lot of their work, although it seems to be stovepiped sometimes, a lot of their work actually can be very collaborative. And we have found that our community, military, and federal facility partnership at the Regional Commission has been extremely helpful in breaking down some of those stovepipes. And so I also got this morning some information from the EPA National LGAC. There's a local government advisory committee for run by the National EPA. I served on this one back in the early 2000s. I don't know why the Bush administration appointed me. I think they needed some political balance, but at any rate, I spent about 3 years working with them. It was very interesting, but it was also very broad. It was national. So we were looking at things in Idaho and San Francisco and Boston and so forth. So it wasn't quite as focused as I like to be on the Mid-Atlantic. But the national LGAC had written to EPA about the bipartisan infrastructure law and wanted to make sure that it tackles the climate crisis, prioritizes equity, environmental justice, and the lived experience of those most impacted by water pollution. So some of these things work in tandem with what we are doing in the Potomac Watershed Roundtable. Willie, I think I will get this letter to you and you can distribute it to the members of the roundtable. It's simply It's actually dated February 18th, but it was just circulated this morning. I think that it would be helpful just as background information, not anything that the roundtable would need to do about this, but again, it's background information. If we were all together, I would have, made copies and gotten this to you, but I got this about 10 minutes ago, so I haven't had time to do much about circulating it.
I'll be happy to do that, Supervisor Gross.
Thank you. Also this morning at this very same time, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Farm Committee, Food and I'm trying to remember it's our Agriculture Committee, is meeting, and I'm missing that meeting because of LGAC, but Potomac Watershed Roundtable, but they're doing a lot of work that I think can parallel what we do. And one of the things that they've been working on is making sure that trying to find ways to encourage urban agriculture, and also getting what we call BIPOC farmers involved. And that's Black, Indigenous, and people of color. There's a lot of interest in the region here among the immigrant community, especially, to be able to have some of the foods that they're used to in their own countries. And we've had a couple of people I know in Prince George's County, I think, who were from countries in Africa who have actually started their own small truck farm to be able to grow the kinds of foods and grains that they're used to in Africa that they can't get here. So these are new businesses that are starting up, but water is going to be very important to them. So there are so many cross pollinations here that I think would be something that the roundtable can tap into and expand what we've been doing. And that leads me to what I really wanted to have a conversation with members of the roundtable this morning. And I've already talked to John Peterson about this, and I want John to jump in when he can.
Supervisor Gross, I see Norman Goulet's hand is up.
Oh, okay, Norm. Thank you.
Yes, just one suggestion on the resiliency and the bases. It probably would be a good idea if we get Chris Landgraf from the commission to give a presentation on the OLDCC grant.
Yes. Thank you. We've got some really good people working on the what I call our BRAC committee, and he would be excellent. Thank you. The roundtable was created in about 2000. So it's been around for 22 years already. And we got a really good, excited start, worked through a lot of things over time, and hosted or partnered on 5 very successful Potomac forums, which I think I attended all of them. They were very, very good. They were both an inspirational and an activity that we could really get our arms around, and brought a lot of people together for these full-day Potomac forums. But over time, it seems to me that we have been perhaps shrinking a bit in what we've been trying to do as the roundtable. COVID did us no favors as far as our work. And like many groups, there was some struggling to maintain our ability to actually meet. That's not to say we haven't done some really good work, but I think we can do better. I think we need to look at expanding our membership categories, making sure that all those categories are filled with real live people. So we need some sort of new blood, some new categories, some new ideas. on how the Watershed Roundtable should look in the next 20 years. I realize that this may be a little blasphemous for some because you put a lot of work into making sure we maintain the roundtable, but I think we can do better. And so that's where I'd like to throw out this idea that we look at expanding what we do, finding new categories, actually making, program and legislative recommendations, having that sort of ingrained into what we do. And making sure that our members with their 3-year terms, because the original bylaws have 3-year terms, but we're not really paying too close attention to that sometimes. I think we need a new strategic planning process. We had, there was an attempt to do that a few years ago. I think we need to relook at that and make the roundtable, which is probably already, as I understand it, the premier one in Virginia, because most other roundtables, as I understand it, are not really active. But I think we can do better. And so I wanted to throw that out for everybody and see what you thought of it. I think we need to look at the bylaws. I think we need to look at our whole our makeup and take the next several months as a separate subcommittee or task force to bring back some recommendations to the roundtable, probably not at the next meeting, but at the fall meeting. I'm going to throw it open. If you think I'm crazy and, leave it alone, it's not broken, so don't fix it. That's an appropriate response also. But I'd like to open it up to everybody. So what do you think about what the roundtable has been doing and where we can go and how we should do that? Any takers?
Chairman Penny, this is John again.
Yes.
I certainly support that. This is something the council has talked with you about for some time. We've had membership categories we've never been able to fill. Mm-hmm. So going back and taking a look at everything, including our bylaws, our charter, and seeing how we might expand and do more, I think this is an appropriate time to do that. The virus, as you say, didn't help us a bit.
Thank you, John. Anybody else?
Chairman Penny, just like to chime in as well. This is Willie Wood with the Northern
Yes.
Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. I agree with the objective of wanting to look into the future, and things that help a system like this move forward as well is diversity. It appears to me as though most of the planning or the structure or the presentation of most of these meetings have been based on the input from the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. Maybe as we look into where we want to go into the future, we should also look at diversifying division of labor, of having other key entities make some other contributions, which might shed a different light in what we're doing right now, and as such, improve progress of this group. And maybe this is a subject we need to have a small committee to discuss and bring back to the group at our next meeting as to what we think is could be an option.
Thank you, Willie. Originally, the roundtable, the division of labor was to be handled throughout the various soil and water conservation districts. And after, as I recall, the first couple of years, it was fairly apparent that Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District had the staffing and the know-how to be the umbrella, and so turning over some of the operational pieces for each meeting to other soil and water conservation districts was what eventually transpired. But getting back to a collaboration of the soil and water conservation districts, rather than just one taking all the organizational pieces and somebody else saying, okay, if we're going to be in your particular area, you can handle lunch. That's not a very good division of labor. So this is another thing that we really need to look at is where, I mean, we're a pretty big area from, you know, Loudon on the north to Northumberland on the south. That's a large area. So we should be able to do more collaboratively. You know, Northern Virginia's interests in many cases, although we share the Potomac piece, our interests are much different quite often than the folks down in the Northern Neck. So we really need to have more collaboration, I think. So thank you, Willie. That's something we will put on that list of items to discuss by a task force. Anybody else? Oh, come on, please don't be quiet. This is our opportunity to say. Yes, Elizabeth.
It's Elizabeth Ward. We actually have a lot more in common with the members of the watershed than you think. I mean, we are all subject to the TMDL and making plans for how to incorporate that. We are all facing climate change together. You know, many of our counties will deal with flooding and issues of integrating planning into the climate change. Land use change is a big deal. Many of us share the resources of the Potomac for our drinking water supply. We share portions of the biome of the river, the hyporheic, which is essential to our ecology, so that we have a lot more in common, and we are all doing things towards recycling. We are all trying to reduce our footprint. Fairfax has more resources than some counties, but it does not mean we don't all share the same interests. I mean, with Northern Virginia becoming the data center capital of the universe, we are responsible for a 30% increase in the use of electricity, which will impact a lot of other plans in the county for how they are going to cope with things. So we have a lot more interest if we bound together and looked at ourselves in a unified manner, rather than just say, okay, the watershed, the Potomac River, we are tied together by our combined ecology.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I think yes, we have many, many interests together. It's the attitude, something that are sometimes different within individual jurisdictions. Other comments? Do folks want to go forward on this? Are there volunteers who would like to work on a task force? I'd like to put about 5 people together to work on this. And I think in addition to John, I'm going to volunteer you.
Yes.
John Peterson and myself, and then we'll need probably 3 other people. We can take more, but at least 3 other people from the diverse areas of the watershed to be able to wrangle this together. And
Maybe we can twist Robert Pickett's arm because he represents the Northern Neck.
Robert, are you willing to be on a task force? We'll meet virtually.
Yes, I should be able to help out.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Well, if we don't have any volunteers, I may be calling you and roping you into this task force, because we really do need to have variety. Yes.
I'm Will Littner. I'm the alternate on the council for Prince William, and I will be on that task force also.
Thank you. I got your name down. Thank you very much. So if we could have one other person, or we can actually do 2, but like to have at least one other person to be on the task force, and then we'll work with Willie to find times for us to meet virtually, probably at least a couple of times, and we'll also get the bylaws and the other information to you so that you've got your text before we meet. So if there's anybody else who would rather not volunteer right now, please just let us know. That you can send me an email, you can send John an email, or send Willie an email that you would like to be on the task force. Also wanted to mention, when Elizabeth brought up the issue of flooding and the shared issues of flooding, the Chesapeake Bay Partnership is looking at how to implement our local LGAC's recommendations for a one-day summit of flood, climate, and disaster experts to discuss ensuring that flood and mitigation efforts and the restoration efforts of the Bay work in conjunction with one another. So this is going to be a big deal, I think, going forward. Just yesterday, you know, part of the Beltway from Virginia into Maryland up across the American Legion Bridge, cars couldn't get through, vehicles couldn't get through because of flooding on the Beltway. So flooding, I think, is going to be a greater issue as we move forward. And so that's going to be something that would actually be in our bailiwick also. So I wanted to let you know about that.
Don't mean to interrupt.
Yes.
Chairman Gross, we also have Norman Goulet's hand up.
Okay, Norm, again?
Yes, ma'am. On the flooding aspect, we can certainly line up Matt Myers, who's working on Resilient Fairfax. We've got Nora Jackson, who's heading up the flooding resiliency work group here within the commission. And we can certainly round up Arlington County, who has their RAMP program, as well as the city of Alexandria, who has their own flood program moving forward. We could easily fill 1 or 2 days just talking about some of the flooding work that's going on now.
Thank you, Norm. Willie, those would be good for future presentations at a roundtable, or if we actually find ourselves able to participate and put together a 6th Potomac Forum, flooding could be the issue for that forum, because I know it's something that has affected most Virginia jurisdictions, some Maryland ones I'm sure too, but from Northern Virginia all the way down to Norfolk, flooding is an issue. So that may be something that we can really get our teeth into. All right. If there's no more discussion on this, on the chairman's report, I am really looking forward to bringing a task force together, figuring out, do we need to make major changes or small changes? I think we do need to expand our membership and make sure that all of those seats that we have on this roundtable are filled, and filled with people who will participate regularly. We can, we are better when we work together, but we need to have people from all of the various organizations. It's especially important, I think, for the ag and forestry and the development and construction and real estate industry. And those are areas where we really haven't had, and also fishing and boating, we really haven't had much participation. So at least not lately. So we need to look at what else we need to do. So we'll be back in touch with everybody. Thank you. And now we will go to the next item on our agenda is the Virginia General Assembly session, and we are exactly on time. I didn't realize we would be able to do that, David, but we are exactly on time, and we're delighted to have Delegate David Volova from District 37. I'm not sure that's still going to be the district number because of redistricting, but I think David is not unknown at all. We have had him on our roundtable before, both as a delegate and also in his life before he became a delegate. I've known David for such a long time. It would be difficult for me to introduce him with a biography, because it's just, here's David Bulova, our great environmental delegate from Northern Virginia in the Virginia General Assembly. David?
Yeah, thank you, Penny. And I assume everybody can hear me okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Perfect. Anyways, it's wonderful to be here, Madam Chair, and nice to see so many familiar faces, folks who have worked professionally in the environmental sphere, as well as those of you who have been down to Richmond, either in person or virtually over the last couple of years or so. And so was really glad to be invited to come and talk about the General Assembly session this year. Having been there at the inception of the roundtable, I know that the beauty of this, as Chairman Gross said, is that this is a two-way street. So, my purpose is to kind of lay out a framework for what I think was important in terms of what got accomplished or what did not get accomplished. But it's extraordinarily valuable for me, as a member of Appropriations and also Ag and Natural Resources Committee, to hear from you in terms of what are the important issues that we ought to be tackling as we go forward. I will say, whenever you have a leadership change like we've had 2 years ago, and then this year going from Republican to Democratic, back from Democratic to Republican, you do have some loss of institutional memory. And I think that was definitely felt this year, not just in the legislative part where you are getting a relatively new crowd with coming in and then taking over the mantle as chairs of committees and subcommittees. But we kind of had the double whammy here of also losing a lot of institutional memory with respect to the administration. And so a lot of faces that have been around for a long time have set sails for different opportunities. And we've got a new crew, that we need to work to be able to get them up to speed in terms of what's going on in Virginia. I will say that I am very pleased with the folks who were appointed to DEQ and DCR. I think most of us, or a lot of us, have known Mike Rolband for many, many years. I first worked with him on the Citizen Wetland Advisory Committee back in 1999. And then I've also known Matt Wells, who's the new DCR director. And so, he's worked in the environmental field for a while, both with respect to conservation and industry, and has been very active in the Forever Virginia movement, which is a coalition of business interests and conservation interests trying to make sure we get money for environmental and water quality issues. So anyways, it's good to have them on board, but again, a lot of new people that we're starting to get familiar with. Normally, at this time, I would be giving you a complete recap of the General Assembly session. This was our long session, so we were down there for 60 days. But as you all know, we were not able to complete the budget on time, and so we went down and convened in special session on Monday. We met for all of about 2 hours and then went ahead and adjourned so that the conferees could go ahead and do their work. And that is really kind of the important part, is that the conferees have the ability to sit down there and work through some of the details of the budget. And so I have no doubt that they're going to be able to do it, and talking behind the scenes with, both House and Senate members. They know the importance of being able to do it. There's a lot of posturing that goes on, in terms of strategically putting the House or the Senate in the position that they want, but they all recognize that we need to go ahead and adopt a budget relatively soon. As far as conservation issues, the budget certainly was the big driver. And so there are years where we'll have legislation that is the big driver. This year, with a couple of exceptions, it really was the budget. And the governor set the bar extraordinarily high. I couldn't tell you how pleased I was to be out there for the governor, not just rolling out one, but two packages for environmental funding. And so we started off with $245 million for outdoor recreation and open space and trails, land conservation. And so that was really exciting. And then we had the historic announcement with respect to unprecedented investments in water quality. And I know there's a lot of important parts of that. The part that was really incredible to me was fully funding our agricultural BMP needs assessment for the very first time in history. And so in terms of meeting the Chesapeake Bay WIP, all of the components are important, but the most expensive by far, and the one that's going to be the toughest, are the agricultural BMPs. And so the fact that we put in that kind of money and that kind of investment was really telling. I was also really glad to see that we continued to increase and put in money for technical assistance, both for the Sonoma Water Conservation Districts and also for Virginia Cooperative Extension. I think our appropriations staff have finally got it that you can put as much money as you want into these funds, but if you don't have real people who are able to segue that into on-the-ground practices and work with private property owners, it's not going to happen. And so I've been really, really pleased in terms of being able to kind of build up and provide some stability with respect to that kind of technical assistance funding. Of course, the downside is that anytime you set the bar that high, it is really hard to go ahead and keep it that high. And so we played a lot of defense. The Senate side, I think, provided a bit better defense than the House side. And so, you know, at least in the House and the Senate, we were able to keep in all the funding for the agricultural BMPs. The technical assistance generally stayed pretty good. One thing that surprised me that stayed in both budgets were 2 FTEs for environmental literacy. And that's a huge deal. We've been trying to rebuild that environmental education program for a number of years. And when you talk about developing a stewardship ethic and what that means for the long-term successes of our programs, you know, that's where a lot of effort needs to be put. And as I mentioned, the setbacks were really kind of on the House side and were more urban in nature. And so SLAF, you know, while there was still some money in the House budget for SLAF, it certainly got cut with respect to the Senate part. Part of the dynamic that's going on there is that DEQ got behind in terms of allocating what they had for SLAF. And so I think we had about 40 million that was still sitting in the bank, and it's hard to explain to our appropriations staff why it is that we need to continue putting money in there. And so one of the things that I know that VAMS has been working on is trying not to get into the same situation and making sure that we have a better schedule, a more predictable schedule for SLAF grants, so that you don't have this backup of money, because there certainly is a heck of a lot of need that's out there. And then I think I saw Amy Jackson from Alexandria, and there might be some other Alexandrians. Combined sewer overflow got absolutely decimated over in the House side. I don't think that means that people want to see raw sewage coming into our rivers, the Potomac and the James. I think it was more of a strategic realization that there are a lot of people on appropriations from those urban areas. They're going to care about that, and so they're going to use that as leverage. So I think that was a lot more strategic, kind of behind the scenes, in order to be able to use that as leverage. Of course, when we get to the special session, a lot of this stuff really is contingent on programs versus tax cuts, right? And so that is the big dynamic that is going on right now with the House and the Senate. And of course, the governor is highly involved at this point as well. And to make room for a lot of the tax cuts that are in the House budget, you had to go ahead and make cuts. And so a lot of that came down to cuts to natural resources. So what I think you will see is that you will see a cut in the grocery tax. You will see some kind of increase in the standardized deduction. It's actually really very out of kilter with the federal level. You'll see some kind of benefit for retire or military retiree pay. Virginia is now in the minority of states where military retiree pay is fully taxable. Another area, and hopefully this I think will get backfilled now, is that the House budget had zeroed out RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And so I think that was almost $200 million of funding that was going directly to flooding and weatherization. And since that was actually defeated as a policy measure over in the Senate, I think that'll go ahead and get backfilled in. But I think the two biggies in terms of how much money that we're going to be able to put back into water resources really is going to be two things. So one of them is going to be the size of that standard deductible. That's huge. So that's about a $2 billion hit on our budget. And so I don't think the Senate is willing to do the whole thing that the governor is asking for. But depending on how much they want to do, that's going to really be indicative of how much money we're going to have left in the budget to put in for natural resources. The other one, of course, is the gas tax issue, and whether or not we go ahead and have a gas tax holiday. The reason why that is mixed up in water quality stuff probably is because there is a sensitivity that you don't want to drain the Transportation Trust Fund. And so my suspicion is that the Senate, if they were to go along with anything to decrease the gas tax, would insist that the Transportation Trust Fund be backfilled with general funds. And of course, that means less money for natural resources. So again, a lot of stuff that's up in the air. My big concern is that we don't get the cart before the horse. It's exciting to see this kind of money, that we have, but I guarantee you it is short-lived. I think our appropriations staff understand that it's not here forever. We haven't set a new level. And so we want to focus on one-time investments, rather than long-time cuts, because ultimately we're going to structurally balance the budget. And the first thing that happens when, we've got to go ahead and cut is often those natural resources funds that we fought so hard for. So that's kind of the budget. I did want to just mention a few legislative items that I thought that you all might be interested in. And so one of the biggies that we've been working on for a couple years, and I won't say really working on, I think it's one of these things where we knew it was a big issue when we were cognizant of it. And, each year we didn't have the bandwidth to go ahead and tackle it. But that is really the balance between solar and prime agriculture, as well as the mitigation for development. So nutrient banks, stream banks, and then prime agriculture and forestry, right? And so kind of focusing on the solar is that we know that we need to go ahead and build our solar infrastructure if we want to reduce our carbon footprint. But the way that it's playing out is that a lot of these large utility-sized solar, they find nice flat land, where there's not too many neighbors, and that's easy to go ahead and convert. And of course, the big pushback on that from a land use standpoint, and also an economic standpoint, is that you are gobbling up irreplaceable and very valuable prime ag and forest lands. So I thought what was interesting is that we had a couple bills dealing with the interface between development and stream mitigation and wetland and nutrient credits, because that's kind of one pressure point. Those are going to be the subject of a study over the next year. So for those, I bet you anything that the Norm Goulets of this world will wind up getting involved in stuff like that. And it's really to kind of think through how do you balance the fact that development is continuing to occur in your urban areas, and you're going to need to have those credits, but at the same time, you don't want to go ahead and gobble up the prime ag lands. For solar, that actually kind of all of a sudden happened. A bill slipped out. I'm not sure that it was meant to happen this year, but it did. And so it was Pandora's box. And so this will be more formalized. And so this was House Bill 206. And so what it is saying is that if you have impacts of over 10 acres of prime agricultural land or 50 contiguous acres of forestry land, that you have to provide some kind of mitigation in order to be able to go ahead and get the state permit for that solar array. The problem is we don't know what mitigation means, right? And so at least for the solar industry, that's the thing that makes them very nervous, right? And so it could be very straightforward and easy, could be very expensive and can go ahead and kill the solar industry even before it's had a chance to mature. And so there is a delayed enactment clause on that, and there is going to be the mother of all stakeholder groups. I mean, you've got, an entire page of who needs to be involved in this to go ahead and kind of figure out what those mitigations are going to be. So anyways, I think that's going to be a really interesting one, and that certainly affects the Potomac watershed, in terms of your rural areas. Another interesting one, and this one may or may not affect folks on this call, but there was, again, a push for increasing tree conservation and tree replacement authority with respect to our localities. I had a bill that the development community and the environmental community, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, had crafted. It didn't make it through the House, but the Senate version, sponsored by Dave Marsden, he was able to see what happened to my bill and was able to work real close with some of the people who had concerns. And what it does is it expands the number of localities that can engage in tree replacement requirements for land development. So for your big areas like Fairfax's that already have these ordinances, probably not going to affect you very much. But if you don't have an ordinance, this very well may be something that you want to take a look at. I think one of the fascinating things about this is kind of a win-win between urban and rural areas. And so for this one, if you have impacts to trees, you want to go ahead and keep the replacement close by, right, to where the impacts are. But that's not always possible in an urban area. And so what this does is it actually opens up the possibility of putting money into a fund that could then go towards riparian restoration in your rural areas. It is an area that, in terms of our Chesapeake Bay restoration goals, we are severely lacking behind as far as our goals are concerned. And so it is kind of a good win-win that if you can't go ahead and mitigate the impacts of tree loss in your urban area, that there's a fund that you can put in there for riparian restoration in order to help rural areas meet those restoration goals. So kind of cool. And then last but not least, because you all had talked about climate change and climate resilience, there is bipartisan support on the climate resilience part. So not necessarily the climate change part, but the climate resilience part. I think everybody understands that Virginia is particularly vulnerable when it comes to sea level rise. This is an area that I had the chance to go ahead and work on two bills. One is to formalize and expand our planning process. And so we had a really great coastal resiliency plan that was just put together. And so what the bill that I put together does is kind of formalizes oversight of that, because this old planner hates it when a good plan sits on a shelf. And so we want to make sure that doesn't happen. And so there's actually now a formal process for reviewing and implementing and reporting out on that. And the other part of it is it expands the planning to inland flooding. And so I think there was a lot of inland areas that were like, hey, this is not just affecting our coastal community. We need the plan to include other inland hazards caused by climate change. So DCR is going to be working on updating that plan in order to be able to include inland flooding. And then the other one was a bill to put in a Resilient Virginia revolving loan fund. And the idea is to provide another funding tool for capital projects related to flood resiliency. And so we've got a number of grant programs out there. And that's really great. A lot of times, you don't have enough money in the grant program, but what you do have is a cash flow program. And so this is meant to provide some gap financing and some low-cost loans to localities, as well as private entities to be able to put in resilience measures. And so this one is particularly cool because you can use it on the private level. And when you think about all the infrastructure we have, a lot of it's public, but a good part of that is going to be private, and they need to have a funding source as well. So a lot of other small bills that we dealt with. I had one dealing with manufactured treatment. We had another fascinating one that dealt with Prince William County. It was a little small, I think it was a pump and haul, kind of out in a rural area of Prince William, where they were doing land application of the sewage, which wasn't a really good water quality thing. And so we actually had this Hobbesian's choice of a bill to decide whether we wanted to actually depart from the Occoquan policy to allow them to go ahead and treat it. And the water quality was actually better. We just kind of had to make that conscious decision, that this, we had a bad decision to go ahead and ultimately make. But those are kind of some of the small bills that we go ahead and deal with in ag and natural resources. But with that, again, really, really glad to be here. Just circling back with respect to that loss of institutional memory and knowledge in the General Assembly and in the administration. It means that your advocacy and your work is all the more important because you are that kind of institutional memory, and you all understand how the process works and the history, as well as what it's going to go ahead and take to protect our natural resources. So thank you all for doing what you do, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, David. Couple of comments before we go to Q&A. Of course, you mentioned that Mike Rolband is now the Secretary of Natural Resources.
He's Director of DEQ.
Director of DEQ. And Mike, of course, was one of the, I think he was an original member of the Potomac Watershed Roundtable. And he was very faithful in attending our meetings early on. So he's very aware of what we have been trying to do. On the environmental education item that you mentioned with the 2 FTEs, I believe environmental education was a part of the 2000 C2K Chesapeake Bay agreement in 2000. So a lot of areas have been struggling with that particular requirement out of C2K. So thank you very much for that. On the SLAF funds, which are always seem to be on the chopping block. You said it had gotten cut in the Senate because there seemed to be a lot of money left in the fund, and why wasn't it getting out there? And I'm wondering, it occurred to me that, if I'm interpreting this correctly, is that the state still doesn't understand the locality's planning processes and all the things we have to go through to be able to even apply for a grant. So is that something that maybe we need to take another look at on SLAF? Because we have that situation even in Fairfax County with our own bonding capacity, is that, sometimes we have a lot of bonding capacity, but we don't have the programs, the projects quite up to snuff yet to be able to actually sell the bond. So is this sort of a similar situation, perhaps, that localities are taking, maybe the process for applying is more difficult than it should be, or that it just takes a longer time to get our plans in place to be able to even apply?
Yeah, and I think there's two, and I saw Craig Carinci jump on, so I bet he has a thought on that as well, and I'd be interested to hear it. With respect to this year, it was the governor had put in $100 million for SLAF. The Senate, I think, kept the $100 million. The House took that down, I think, to $25 million, if I'm recalling correctly. Part of the issue is that we still already had about $40 million kind of sitting in there that had been appropriated but not used. And so one of the issues that I know Chris Pomeroy and VAMSA are working on that caused that $40 million backup is that there is not a set schedule for grant application process. And so it's not only unpredictable in terms of when during the year, and sometimes you're right, is that when doesn't match up with your local processes. And then there's just the regularity of the process, so that you can kind of bank on this time of year, this is always going to go ahead and happen. And so we wanted to make that a little bit more consistent. We had actually been thinking that we would do it legislatively, but I think Chris went ahead and reached an agreement with DEQ that we could do that by some kind of letter agreement. The other part, notwithstanding, that we had that backup, the BMP needs assessment that we do every year is really important. And that's what the agricultural community has been working very, very hard on, is ensuring that we have a really good collective understanding of the cost of what it's going to take to meet our Chesapeake Bay WIP 3. And we need to make sure that our urban areas are doing the same thing, right? And so if we're not getting a good response and our appropriators are getting the signal that, well, maybe this isn't such a big problem, that money is gonna go away and get directed elsewhere. And so we need to make sure that all of our localities are looking at, between now and, when they need to meet their TMDL goals, and thinking through what kind of projects they're going to have, so that's a realistic number.
Thank you, David. Craig, do you want to weigh in? Because you're you're the county SLAP expert.
I'm not sure about that, but there is one component of the SLAP grant program that may be partly the cause of the additional funding that's always left over. One of the criteria in the SLAP grant program is the state will not award the grant until the construction bids have been received. So it puts onus on the jurisdictions to front that money without the guarantee that you're even going to get the money at the end. And so there's some hesitancy on local jurisdictions to even apply, because they're not sure if they can fund the construction if they don't get the grant. And then there's a 3-year limit on the time frame in which you've applied for the grant that you actually have to complete the work. And one of our local jurisdictions, the town of Vienna, actually their grant expired because they couldn't get it to construction within that 3-year period because of land rights or whatever. So it really puts an onus on having projects in construction or real close to having construction if you really want to utilize that grant funding. So if there was a way that we could grant the award before the design, I think you would see a little bit of that more money would be utilized quicker, some of it in the design, and then extending the period for the grant to cover design and construction, if that makes sense.
And that's the kind of detail that I think a Mike Rollband understands. And I think that's one of the beauties of having somebody like Mike in that position. And so I think that would be a great role for this body or another body, to be able to invite him to sit down and say, hey, here are the pinch points that are keeping us from most effectively utilizing this really important revenue source. So that might be something that you'd want to walk him through, because I don't think that those items are necessarily contained in the legislation. That's all policy and regulatory on their part. So he's in a better position to make those changes.
Right. One other aspect, and they did modify this in the last grant application. There was a policy ceiling of $5 million limit for a jurisdiction, and some jurisdictions, including Fairfax, had submitted grant applications that exceeded the $5 million because we had the need, and this was the first year that they actually expanded the $5 million limit per jurisdiction. As projects are becoming more expensive, I think it's really important for them to look at that $5 million limit and potentially raise that as well. And that's just a policy issue that, again, Mike might be able to help us with.
Craig, thank you. Would you mind putting some of that? I've taken some notes, but would you mind putting some of that into an email to me, so that we can look at, we talk about, and the roundtable has in the past done a letter to legislators, to delegates and senators, as the General Assembly session comes forward. But we really haven't done anything that I can recall dealing directly with the administration and making these recommendations. There's no reason why we couldn't have letters going out in between the General Assembly meetings. And so having all of this sort of distilled would be the basis for a really good letter from the roundtable, asking for a meeting most likely, but also raising these particular issues in writing. So thank you very much. If you could get that to me, then we can work on an appropriate letter. And there was one other thing, I think. On climate resilience, David, you had mentioned climate resilience, and I think that's where we were talking earlier about the Community Military Partnership for Northern Virginia, working with bases and so forth. So I think climate resilience is going to be something that we can really get our teeth into in the future also. And of those who attended the last roundtable meeting, we did have a presentation from Aaron Berryhill, who was the solar program manager at Virginia Department of Energy, and we did talk about the solar and the prime ag lands, which is, I think, going to be a larger and larger issue as we move forward in renewable resources. Other comments or questions for Delegate Volba? We still have some time in this part of the agenda for questions or comments.
Chairman Gross, Norman did have his hand up. I wonder if he still wants to say something.
Okay, go ahead.
Supervisor Gross, I was just going to comment on the SLAF.
Yes.
The hang-ups have been in a couple of different areas, and you've already heard a number of them. I will say that there has been a stakeholder group working on the next set of guidelines that will be coming out for the next appropriation for the grant. And one of those is that it'll be expanding it to not only just phosphorus now, but expanding it to nitrogen. So for those coastal areas where phosphorus has not been the bigger issue, but nitrogen has been, we'll be expanding the pool there for people who may be able to try to get some more nitrogen efficient practices in place. So that aspect has been taken care of. In terms of the urban SLAF funding survey that comes out, one of the biggest problems we've had continually and still have continually is that for the most part, it's only the regulated jurisdictions that are supplying this information to DEQ. We have been having a very hard time getting the unregulated community to participate in the SLAF process and to provide DEQ with their needs, because unfortunately of the fact that they are unregulated. So I would really encourage the unregulated communities in the roundtable to participate in that survey and try to utilize those funds where they potentially could.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
and just because Norm went ahead and raised the whole unregulated issue, and that is something very big, that I know DEQ and the Secretary of Natural Resources are going to be paying keen attention to, because there isn't ownership by a locality like your MS4s, and the state's ultimately going to have to figure out how to deal with that. Maryland had a neat approach. I'm blanking on the exact name of it, but it was basically performance-based water quality improvements, where they would take a chunk of money and instead of it going through a locality and through a grant program or something like that, basically it would be like, hey, we've got $50 million. You private sector come to us with a plan for how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment you could go ahead and reduce for this $50 million. And they would come in with those proposals, and whichever could go ahead and get you the best bang for your buck, with some kind of a reasonable assurance that they could actually make it happen, you give them that grant award. And so the idea was that would be perfect for something for the unregulated community where you don't have a permit to go ahead and drive the process. But just FYI, that's kind of out there in terms of how do we close the gap in terms of your unregulated urban.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? I know that we have a lot of people that I see on the list, and I want to make sure that you all have the opportunity to comment or put something forward. It doesn't have to be a question necessarily. but something that you want us to be able to capture in the discussion, please don't hesitate. Any last comments or questions for Delegate Bulova? I guess not.
Right.
And David, we're gonna give you back some of your day.
Very good. Well, I think most people on this call know how to reach me and have reached me in the past. So please use me as a very happy resource, and looking forward to continuing to work with y'all.
Thank you so much, David. We're going to move on to our next presentation, which is a Chesapeake Assessment Scenario Tool, which is called CAST. It's a presentation by Ariana Johns, Chesapeake Bay Data Specialist from DEQ, and Kevin McLean, Chesapeake Bay Program Manager, also with DEQ. Ms. Johns, are you with us?
I am. Good morning, everybody.
All right, go ahead.
Hey, all right. I'm going to need to share the screen. Can everybody see the opening screen of CAST? Okay. So I'm guessing most people haven't registered. You just click the register button and it'll ask you for basic information, just like registering for every other app these days. I'm going to go ahead and log in. And most everybody's going to just want to end up generating various reports. So you come up to your results and then go down to reports, and it'll pull this part up. You can select from many different reports. I think most people find it useful to look at the BMP summary report and a loads report. I'm going to go ahead and do a loads report because that's representative of how you do all of the other reports. Everybody has a different way of naming their reports. I usually do it with the type of report first, then the spatial designation, which we're going to go ahead and do soil and water conservation districts, and then which progress run. Then you come down to your geographic scale, and there's many different geographic scales that you can select from. But Virginia has 3 specific ones that are just to us, which is our planning districts, the soil and water conservation districts, and then the district areas. I'm just going to go ahead and do this, and we're going to just do Loudon Soil and Conservation District. You select as many different ones as you want, and then click this arrow, and it'll bring it over into this box. And once it's in this box, that's how you know which district you're doing. So we're only going to look at 2020 progress. You just scroll down to 2020 progress, and we'll put WIP 3 official in there as well. Typically, unless you're really diving into the data, I go with the major load source. And I usually like to separate federal agencies from non-federal because a lot of times we only want to look at what Virginia is doing. But there are you can look at it by each agency, which is federal agencies, not state agencies. So, and then you hit submit report and it generates really, really quickly. You'll get an email saying that your report has been generated once it's generated, but it usually takes less than 5 minutes to get it done. So we'll wait. Oh, there it is, generating a report, and it's complete. Okay, and then I guess I'm gonna have to switch screens to actually show this report. Let's see. Sorry, I am not super used to using Teams yet.
You may have to unshare and then reshare in order to show a different screen.
Okay, awesome. Let's. There we are. All right, and here is what. Hey, here we go. Can everybody see an Excel spreadsheet?
We could, but it went away, so you may have to share that again.
Well done. Okay, here we go. All right.
There, now you got it.
There it is.
Okay, cool. So it opens up into the README tab, which tells you the version of CAST that you're using, the date that you created the file, which can get really useful, especially when you start running a bunch of these. And then it just explains what the summary or load report is. If you go over into scenario details, this is where you get which scenarios you have run. So I did 2020 progress in the WIP 3. Then the scenario descriptions just tells you a little bit about what's in it. You can look at which cost profiles it's run on, the cost formulas, the base years, which is base land use, the base conditions, which is the zoning, and then the wastewater data set. So then when you look at the actual data, this is just a very small subset. Usually mine's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rows long. But I always end up doing everything in pivot tables. So I don't know how everybody is used to using pivot tables or not, but I select all my data, then go up to insert, hit pivot table. I usually don't add it to a data model, so I uncheck that box. Then you bring it over here, then it opens it up into a pivot table. I always like to put my geography down so I know what I'm looking at. And then we'll look at the different load sources. Actually, let's go ahead and look at the sectors instead. And you're going to have this EOS and EOT. So like in load, EOS stands for nitrogen loading at the edge of stream. We generally don't look at that. Planners at a local level look at that, but like at DEQ, I spend most of my time looking at the edge of tide, which is this nitrogen loading at the edge of tide. I'll bring that down into here. And I always come over and format my cells so that I don't have to look at a bunch of decimals and make it easier by adding in the separator. So we can look at the 2020 progress for Loudoun Soil and Water Conservation District. These are the loads at the edge of tide for nitrogen. And then we can go ahead and put in our WIP 3 loads. So you can look at the difference in pounds of nitrogen delivered at where you are currently, and then where the WIP 3 is saying that we should be. But yeah, that's a basic overview of one of the many different reports you can get there. So I'm going to go and show you some of the other available. There it is. Okay. So one of the best things about CAST is that they have a ton of information about everything in here. You can see there's 9 videos and 187 minutes in those videos. And they really, really help break down each and every piece of CAST that's available for us. A lot of it's really simple ones, like, you know, how to download your reports, how to create reports, which is, you know, what I just went over. Adding various scenarios. I started CAST 101s. Olivia, who does all of this, really lays out CAST really well in there. Then there's a lot of user documentation as well. It is fantastic. Like, this is a great resource for if you're just trying to get your feet wet in CAST. And I don't know. I know Norm has a huge familiarity with CAST, so, but I'm not sure about everybody else. And one of the things about the way CAST is set up is there's always this view documentation button anywhere that you go. And if you hit that button, it brings up another window. I don't know if you can see the other window or not, but it brings up another window that pulls up the section of the user documentation about where you were in the various points in CAST. So let's, is there any specific questions yet about CAST?
I don't see any hands up or questions.
Okay.
We're really looking at the overview of how to use it and what's and what's there.
All right. Well, I showed you a loads report. Let's go ahead and look at the BMP summary report. So we'll do Loudon again. Again, these are all populated in the exact same way. So I'm going to come down to Soil and Water Conservation District, up Loudon, and we're going to do 2020 progress and WIP 3 again. Nice. And yeah, it's really quick with generating the reports, thankfully. That's kind of why I like to do these live, because people can see how quick it is to generate small reports. When you're generating like reports for the entire Bay watershed, it can take a couple minutes, but it's usually not super bad.
I guess one of the questions I would have is, where does all this data come from?
It
There's
It
an awful
is.
lot of data here.
it is. It is data derived from the Bay model. This is like our input output of it's the output of that model.
Okay.
And yeah, it's.
Ariana, this is Daniel Moore with DEQ. Hi,
Hey,
how are you?
Dan.
I've got a quick question, just kind of 30,000 feet level. Could you talk a little bit about the underpinnings of CAST, how it came to be, how long it's been in existence, and what is the overall purpose for CAST?
Well, the overall purpose for CAST is to allow, it's a planning tool that allows us to see our progress towards the WIP 3 goal. It's been around since 2017, 2018. That's might have been here a little bit before that, but I don't think it was much before that. But yeah, the overall use of it is in order to get the loads, the modeled loads data that everybody is concerned about.
And how do you go about making sure that the data that you collect is accurate, or is that even possible?
I mean, it is accurate. It's modeled data that I don't quite understand your question, Daniel.
Well, it could be that I'm incredibly naive and don't know enough about the process, but the question is, at what point do you, is there any process whereby it's necessary to verify the data as being accurate? I guess that's another way of asking the very same question.
I mean,
these are built on models that are in the infrastructure of the program itself, and thereby the data that you get, is accurate. Is that how it goes?
Yeah. That's how it goes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure what y'all are looking at right now. I wish this had like, okay, I'm gonna switch over to sharing. It's BMP summary report.
So Ariana, if I may ask a question while you're doing that, from the user perspective, tell me if I'm wrong that this is capable of probably identifying or recommending BMPs that can be used to address specific pollution concerns and probably give you multiple of them so you can compare prices of these practices. Is that right?
It can. I don't usually deal with the price side of things, but there are reports that can give you the different cost profiles and how all of the costs go. I only ever look at loadings and how those are affected.
Yeah.
And Willie, this is Kevin. I would say that it's most useful on the kind of local and implementation side of things, like at a soil and water conservation district, to kind of check in on your status, you know, where you are locally on reaching these goals. Anything that has a price in here is going to be a rough average, a rough estimate, you know, but it can give you a better sense of how many of this or that type of BMP you might be wanting to target moving forward towards our 2025 goals. And then you can kind of work with landowners or you know, the public to come up with projects that will help meet that goal and you know, work towards those cost estimates a little more closely, if that makes sense.
So this is your BMP summary report where it breaks it down into various practices and practice types. Your agricultural non-point source practices started out. So you can see like conservation tillage. There is currently 5,000 acres, and the WIP 3 goal is 6,890. So really close to getting there.
So for members of the roundtable who want to use or explore CAST, they can register and pull up their own jurisdictional information.
Yes.
This is done by counties, not by anything smaller than counties, is that, or anything different than counties. So would cities be covered by this at all, the independent cities? Like, would City of Alexandria have something in CAST, or would it have to be, is it left out, or is it included somehow?
It's not left out. I'm gonna share the CAST screen again, because I spend my time at a few different scales, but they're not usually like small jurisdictional scales. So our scales, you can do the entire watershed. Let's look at the county area by.
Yeah, I thought there was something that showed.
Okay. So in order to search, because this lists every county in the watershed.
Watershed, okay.
Yeah, so you hit the comma and then put Virginia in there. Cluster.
So it does have, yeah, okay.
Yeah, like, yeah, Hampton City, Manassas City, Lynchburg City.
Yeah, Falls Church City, okay.
Yeah.
Adriana, this is Norm. It only goes down as far as the independent cities. It does not go down as far as the towns.
The towns will be included in the counties, most
That's
likely.
correct.
Yeah, okay.
The other way we can break this down is by what's called the land river segment. And the land river segment is the hydrology aspect to the boundaries of the basins within the watershed. Another appropriate breakout group for this group here is you can break it down by the soil and water conservation districts. You can also break it down by, in Virginia, the planning district commissions. The CAST tool basically has multiple functions. There's a front end function where you can develop scenarios, or basically what if scenarios, looking at a suite of BMPs for the agricultural community as well as the urban community, for those different land masses that we just discussed. And using those scenarios, you can develop these plans. For instance, we used the Northern Virginia Planning District Commission boundary to develop the Northern Virginia Phase 3 WIP. And that's a combination of the urban BMPs and the agricultural BMPs that was combined into the state WIP 3. A local government can also use these as a way of looking at their MS4 action plans and comparing what the CAS tool says versus what their own action plans say. The back end side of this is looking at the progress scenarios, the annual progress reports that the Bay program puts out. This is also a way that individual users can slice and dice the data to look at the areas of interest that they may be interested in, whether it be those geographic scales that we were talking about, or the individual sectors, for instance, wastewater or agriculture or urban. So CAS is a tool that allows you to slice and dice the data, either on the front end or in the back end, for the user to take a look at what may have been of interest to them.
Norm, thank you for that outline. In looking at this, I would suggest that if roundtable members, when they log into this CAST approach, allow yourself plenty of time, because I think that you could go, it looks fascinating to be able to go, okay, you click on this main thing, then you go on to something else and something else and something, and pretty soon you've used up, a lot of time just by being able to navigate through all of these, because it'll be very interesting. Well, if I find this here, then maybe how does this compare to my neighboring jurisdiction? It could be really a fascinating exploration here.
There's a lot to explore in CAST, definitely. And there's even graphs and maps that people will find interesting. So we can look at 2020 progress and nitrogen at the edge of tide and against WIP 3. Sorry, I'm coughing occasionally. I had COVID the other week, so I'm still kind of getting over that.
Thank you for giving it a try with us, because I know that can be, I don't know personally, I know from other folks that, you do need to take some time to recover, and not overdo it.
Luckily mine was pretty mild, fortunately. So just still got the occasional cough. But yeah, so you can see here, trying to, there's the Potomac, but it's a good representation to give you a rough estimate of where the pounds per year are coming from. And this is at the land river segment scales that Norm was talking about. And then we'll go to some graphs.
While Ariane is doing that, Norm, it seems to me years ago there was something called VAST. Do you recall that? I think we were at one of the community colleges out in Warrenton when it was presented to us in that sort of barn-like structure out there, and I think it was called VAST. Is this a more refined, a more sophisticated tool than VAST?
Supervisor Gross, yes. This VAST was the predecessor of CAST.
Okay.
Yes. CAST got a lot more sophisticated because it actually, to a certain extent, became the watershed model, whereas VAST was just a basic reporting tool. With CAST, you can actually run scenarios essentially within the watershed model and generate output. VAST was pretty much limited to just a reporting tool.
Okay.
And for those of you who have been around even longer than that, we had a tool called Scenario Builder.
Yes.
Scenario Builder and VAST, you can essentially say, became the third generation of those two combined.
Okay, so those were the baby steps. All right, thank you, Norm. I knew you would know.
I'm showing my age.
You've been around for a while. So now this is an example of the kinds of graphs that you can get on CAST.
Yeah, and these are direct outputs, so you don't have to like go in Excel and create your graphs in there unless you want to do more customizable graphs. But Olivia and company definitely have created a lot of tools that we can just dig through this massive amount of data. And then let's go ahead and look at it. So that was the gross loads. And then you can look at each of the different sectors. So you've got 2020 progress versus WIP 3. And then as you cursor over all of these, it also gives you the actual pounds of nitrogen. So this is your sources of nitrogen, then your sources of phosphorus, and then sources of sediment. And yeah, let's.
So you have one.
And to follow up something that I think that Dan had asked, how the data is, verified and so forth. This is based on the Chesapeake Bay model. Is that what you said?
Yeah. This is the output of that model.
Now,
like Norm was saying that.
Go ahead.
Huh?
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like Norm was saying, it is, for all intents and purposes, the model.
The reason I asked that is that there was a time, I think I haven't heard it so much now, although I think that there are still some smaller jurisdictions who have some concerns about the accuracy of the data in the model for their own particular jurisdiction. Has that pretty much, and maybe this is beyond what you know about this, so I would throw this question out to the roundtable overall. Has the model pretty much been either validated to discount those kinds of objections, or has the science become so much better that we don't really have those issues anymore? A few years ago, it was a big deal. I know that in some cases, I know there were some Maryland locations that were quite upset about the amount of how their ag lands and the composition of their ag lands were defined. And then I know down in Tidewater there were some jurisdictions who were in Virginia that were quite concerned about how the numbers came out, things like amount of livestock and so forth in the Bay model. But I guess maybe that has all been corrected and addressed.
Penny, I can address some of that. I would say that the science is good. That the science that is behind all this and it informs this is really strong. I think sometimes what we see, there's kind of two disconnects that are always a part of modeling and that we continue to work on. One is not everything gets reported, efficiently and effectively. We take information from a lot of different groups, like we've been talking about today: soil and water conservation districts, PDCs, localities. All these different groups are reporting their implementation through the state's BMP warehouse, and then we, pass that up to NEAN, which is the tool that EPA uses to kind of record all this. And sometimes things don't get reported immediately. Some projects get overlooked. Sometimes there are translation issues when it gets reported into our system, and then from our system to the federal system, and we have to go back and revisit it. So there's it's the best attempt to capture everything, and we're continuously working to capture those things that haven't been recorded yet. And then on the other side of things, you know, when you're modeling something, a lot of times what happens is a model can spit out things like, oh, in order to accomplish this goal, you need to get in 300 miles of living shorelines, and you only have 100 miles of living of shoreline, you know, that could even be converted. So those things are continuously being improved and worked on. But the model it's impressive. I mean, it's a ton of data spitting out some extensive outputs, and every once in a while there's these disconnects between the model and reality, you know, of what's either what has already been done or what still needs to be done. And we continue to work on improving that and getting as much data as we possibly can into it so that it's more and more accurate. Does that make sense?
Yes, that helps a great deal. I think the model has become more sophisticated as it's gone along from the time it was first introduced a long time ago, and everybody was, you know, making criticizing the model because it didn't have certain things, or it didn't report it correctly, and it was like, does anybody know that, you know, have they actually taken a look at what's on the ground rather than just doing it by modeling? So, but it sounds to me like the model has become more sophisticated, especially as we're going through how you derive information from the model, which is what CAST is doing. So, thank you.
So, Chairman, I have one quick question. I'm looking at this from the agricultural planner's perspective, and it looks like a good regional tool, but to what level can we drill down to make it still efficient? Can we go, I know we can go down to a sub-shed level. Can we go to a farm level to make it adequate or efficient? And if so, what size parcel are we talking about?
No, the smallest you can go down from CAST is the Land River segment. That is the smallest output that you will get out of CAST.
The Land River segment, okay.
Yeah.
And Willie, I think much like your question about costs earlier, I think how we envision this, you know, being useful to folks in this group is, you know, you, for example, with Northern Virginia Soil and Water, you can pull information for the district, for the Soil and Water Conservation District, and then you guys at the district are that connect between this model and the reality on the ground. You know, you have those connections, maybe not so much for ag in Northern Virginia, but where there is need, you know, who has interest to help meet those goals. You're kind of the translation between the model output and the reality there on the ground, you know, getting that implementation done.
Okay. All right. Ariana, do you have anything else to demonstrate to us?
And now unless there's a specific part you would like to see, because I showed you the graphs that are available, and I can share
I think from the standpoint of, thank you, from the standpoint of how to use the CAST and how to access it and what's included, this has been very helpful. I don't know that there are, I mean, if we have questions about why certain things are in the model or what this means, that's not necessarily something that you can respond to. This is how to use this particular tool. And so I want to make sure that we open it up to everybody on the call with questions or comments about CAST and how it can be used by our various members. You know, as an elected official, I look at this and say, well, okay, this is helpful to know. It's not necessarily a tool that I would use in my everyday work, but it's very helpful to know that when there are questions that come up, we can use this tool we can access this tool to be able to answer the questions. I don't know, Craig, Craig Carinci, are you still on the call?
I am, Penny.
Oh, good. Wondering just, and I'm picking at you because I know you and you're my guru on some of these. Is this a tool that your staff uses, accesses?
Yes, we do.
Some of the planning, you do.
Yes, we do.
So I
And-
would imagine that other jurisdictions, staff members are finding this to be something that, especially as we're looking at policies and what we need to do to meet some of our goals, you're able to use this as your background.
Yeah, and we also use it to compare with what we think the, our progress on the bay has been. So we like to compare our, based on the input that we put in the into the warehouse in terms of where we think the benefits that and the load reductions that we've computed, and we compare it with the CAS tool as well. And then if we see major discrepancies, as you alluded to before, we would raise that up through NORM or other, entities to raise to state at the state level.
Okay. Thank you. Questions from members of the roundtable? This is our opportunity to have the discussion of these tools and what's available to us. So I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to have a question or a comment. Anybody? I suspect we're all trying to figure out when we adjourn the meeting, how many will go on to this register for the tool and see, explore their own jurisdictions. It does look, the more we get into this, the more interesting it becomes.
Yeah, it's a huge, very useful tool for all sorts of planning.
Well, it also is a good tool to compare to our neighbors, because there's always the pointing fingers that no, it's their fault, or it's their responsibility and so forth. And this really puts it all together to show exactly where we are, or pretty much where we are, and what we still need to do. All right. If there are no questions of our presenters, I want to thank Ariana Johns and Kevin McLean. And Kevin, thank you very much for your explanation, response to my questions too. So we will give you a portion of your day back. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
And we hope you feel better and get completely over your cough, Ariana. Good.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We will now go to any open discussion, questions, comments about the roundtable's work, anything you think should go on a future agenda. We already have suggestion of looking at flooding and getting some speakers on flooding, also doing the resilience on some of our federal lands, such as the Quantico and Fort Belvoir. Any other things that you think should be put on our agendas? We also have, parallel to this, the task force work that we will do to bring back some recommendations to the roundtable overall about changes to bylaws, expansion of membership, and future opportunities for us as an organization, as a structure. So I want to give everybody an opportunity to weigh in on anything that we haven't covered that you would like to bring up. I know it's Friday and everyone is perhaps anxious for the weekend, but I do want to give you the opportunity to make any comments. Actually, I want to call on a couple of people because I know you're on the line. Adria Bordas, are you there. Can you give us an update on what Extension is doing in some of these areas? I didn't give her a hint that I was going to call on her, so Adria, if you're there. And the next person I'm going to call on, I believe, is going to be Debbie Cross and then Jim McClone. Let's go to Debbie. Debbie, do you have any kind of update or report that you would like to give to us from your shop? Debbie, we're not hearing anything. I see you've taken yourself off of mute, but I don't think we hear anything. We'll try and come back to Debbie. Jim McClone, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me, Penny?
Yes, we can hear you, Jim. Can you give us an update on forestry?
Yeah, there were a couple of things. David Bova mentioned that there were a couple of new urban forestry legislation that added to the builds on the state code that allows tree canopy requirements. One of the things that the roundtable might work on, and this is something the Department of Forestry hopefully will have the funds to work on, is expanding the use of that legislation. The last I heard, there were only 19 jurisdictions across the state that had tree canopy goals. And I think that establishing those goals is going to be really important for resiliency with regard and meeting a lot of the WIP 3 goals for urban tree planting. The department has hired a statewide coordinator for watershed implementation that's going to be focused on WIP 3, particularly riparian buffers and urban and community forestry tree planting. And we are in the process of hiring a regional coordinator for that will be working mostly in Northern Virginia. There has been some talk about increasing the number of foresters in Northern Virginia. Right now we have 3 positions to cover Loudoun, Prince William, Fairfax, and Arlington County, and we may be adding a 4th to that. What else is going on? I know that there was some mention about solar panels, and Rob Farrell, who's a state forester down at the annual workshop there in Staunton, mentioned that solar panels have become one of the top threats to forest land, these big installations. So we are working on that. We've started a new hardwood forestry initiative, but there is a lot of stuff going on particularly with urban and community forestry to meet or help meet some of the tree planting goals in WIP 3 that I talked about. Right now, this year, just in the Potomac Work area, which is Northern Virginia, they're asking us to plant 30,000 new urban trees, as well as 15 acres of turf conversion and 10 acres of riparian buffer. And that is less than a tenth of what we would need to do just in that 4-county area to meet the WIP 3 goals. So there's been a lot of emphasis on that. One thing that came up in the budget is up until, well, even now, because we don't have a budget yet, as far as I understand, all of our urban and community forestry programs are being funded wholly by the federal government through grants from the U.S. Forest Service. Governor Northam was the first governor to recommend state funding for urban and community forestry. He put in $6 million, $3 million for each year in his outgoing budget. And I'm not sure where that stands right now. The other big thing for the Potomac and the Roundtable is the watershed, or the Virginia Trees for Clean Water Grant Program, which again, Governor Northam put $4 million in his budget for that. And I'm not sure what's happened with that. The last I heard, I think those numbers may have been halved. And we have expanded our forestry center in Augusta, because one of the issues we're going to have with trying to plant all these trees is where they're going to come from. So we're growing a lot more seedlings in Augusta, and there was money in the budget to bring the New Kent Forestry Center back online to also produce hardwood seedlings. So
Thank you, Jim. You know, that's a good point when we get very excited about, you know, going to native plants and not permitting certain things and wanting to up how much we're doing. We forget about the nursery stock and how much time they need. I think it was when we were looking at that in Fairfax County a few years ago. The nurseries needed 3 years to get to the level of stock available that we were looking for, and it was a big shock to us that you couldn't just go down to Merrifield Garden Center or Meadows Farm or something, get what you need, because they said, no, we don't have it. And it takes us that much time to get into it.
Yeah.
So thank you, Jim. Thank you.
One of the advantages is we're growing seedlings so we can come online a lot quicker, because usually they're only 1 year old instead of 3 or 4 years old.
Yeah. Well, that's partly, you know, when you're looking at the commercial sector, it takes them longer. And I think by growing your own, you can do it faster. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things I've been trying to convince people is they should be planting smaller trees, which take less time to get to.
Yes.
Get out there. So.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Jim.
You're
I'm
welcome.
going to go back to Debbie. Debbie, I wanted to.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Huh. So anyway, technical issues. We do have a few changes within our department. We have a new department director, Matt Wells, came on March the 21st. I've not had the opportunity to meet Mr. Wells, but so we have a new department director, and we also have a new division director. So our division of soil and water conservation that oversees the soil and water conservation district. Now James Martin, who was formerly with DEQ, is our division director. Daryl Glover, who had been the division director, has moved up to be assistant department director, covering soil and water conservation districts and floodplain management and dams. So so we've got some new faces, and really excited to have James at the helm of the Division of Soil and Water. He brings a lot of valuable information and a good friend. He was with DEQ for many years. So I suppose those are the two things that are going on within our department.
Thank you. So that we have sort of well-known faces in new positions.
Yes, yes.
That's good. That's so we've got some continuity, which is really important, really important. Thank you, Debbie.
Sure.
I'm going to go back to Curtis Dalbrook. Curtis, are you on the line, and can you give us an update?
I am. Hi, everybody.
There you go.
Let's see. Let's a number of things. I'd like to remind everybody that Potomac cleanup season is coming, and that I strongly encourage everyone to spread the word about all the cleanups that are happening along the Potomac River this spring. You can check out resources from Alice Ferguson Foundation or Alliance from Chesapeake Bay or Potomac River Keeper Network. All of these are good places to find a spot where you can either go to an existing cleanup or sponsor a cleanup site yourself. So I know this is kind of happens every year, but it's still, I think, a very important aspect to drive stewardship toward the Potomac River in the spring when people are getting out and You know, with the peak of the cherry blossoms and everything, we need to do our own parts to manage the beauty of the river. And what else is going on? ICPRB had worked closely with Arlington and the Virginia Department of Health on road salt management. And that was a very successful program and a toolkit for local governments to address salt problems is available on the Virginia Department of Public Health website. Since that time, there's interest in Maryland, and ICPRB is now working with Maryland Department of Environment to bring their road salt management up to the standards that we've got for Arlington and in Virginia now. So that is a real positive thing, that road salt is such a real problem that really doesn't get enough press. And I guess with our past sort of mild winter, we got off with doing less salt this year, but it still requires a lot of active management to keep our freshwater streams from becoming permanently saltier. And on a final note, ICPRB staff is working toward holding a, well, maybe it'll be a hybrid by that time, this fall, a webinar on PFAS issues in the Potomac watershed. And we are now getting presenters for that. Our goal is to provide a snapshot of PFAS hotspots and issues within the Potomac watershed and what is being done to address them. And it seems like there's a lot of conferences going on about this right now. But you know, every time I read something else, it just brings back what an overpowering problem this is that we need to address. And the most recent one was, I was listening to, I think it was NPR, and they had an article about skiing. Okay, and you hear all this stuff about Teflon pans and pots and about polar fleece and all this other stuff, you know, that's causing PFAS stuff. Well, it turns out that for years and years, people have been waxing their skis with PFAS-based wax. And this whole article is about some poor lady who went down and took snow samples at the bottom of a downhill ski resort, okay, and took those snow samples to a lab, and the lab guy's going, where did you get this stuff? Because it was really, really high. And she goes, oh, at the bottom of a ski run. And they were kind of freaked out about the whole thing. And the article talked about how, at least for competitive skiing, how they're going to start being demanding PFAS-free waxes. And this is evidently especially a problem with cross-country skiing, which everybody kind of looks at as this, I don't know, environmentally friendly way to get out and recreate. And it just kind of wigs me out that we're spreading this stuff all over nature and without even knowing it. Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to this PFAS webinar coming this fall, and I'll keep you updated as that progresses. And I guess that's all I have for today.
Thank you, Curtis. And PFAS is one of those issues that it started out some smaller jurisdictions. I know in North Carolina were very concerned about it. This is at our National Association of Counties Environmental, Energy, and Land Use Committee that I was the vice chair for quite some time. Now I chair their water subcommittee, and it was sort of, it seemed to be unique when it first came up, and then the more we've explored this, it's all around us, absolutely all around us. And it doesn't matter whether you are at Nellis Air Force Base in the Southwest, or if you are on top of a mountain, or if you are on the shoreline of North Carolina. It is all around us. So PFAS is going to be I think it will be a major issue for most jurisdictions. I have not heard had not heard the ski wax story. Thank you.
Well, I would just like to add, on your comments at the beginning of this whole meeting, I'm kind of different than a lot of people who attend the round table because I live on the other side of the river, and ICPRB is a regional agency, and we've certainly got a lot of value as a regional agency to attend these meetings and understand on a first-person basis what's going on with the conservation districts in Virginia. So in addition to the value that you guys see connecting together, I want to add that there's a value to the roundtable and that people like me can come here and really get a good lay of the land about what's going on in the Virginia part of the watershed. And that's very valuable to us. And the relationships we have with the people in Virginia have certainly assisted the commission in times of funding and in times of raising awareness for these issues. So I'm thankful to be part of the roundtable, and thank all you guys.
Curtis, thank you very much. ICPRB was instrumental in getting us started, actually, as I recall, some of those early Potomac forums. And I'm trying to remember the wonderful gentleman who was in your position years ago, Joe, I can't remember his last name.
Joe Hoffman was an executive director.
Yes. And he was absolutely superb in his assistance to the roundtable in those early years. He taught me a whole lot. I think he taught us all a whole lot because there had not been a whole lot of collaboration with ICPRB. It was sort of out there. We knew it was there, but nobody was really doing a whole lot of collaboration. And some things came up that needed collaboration, and boy, ICPRB was right there with us. And prior to that was actually very instrumental with COG and helping us do some of our drought work back in the late 90s. So thank you, Curtis. Very definitely a partnership. We have a couple of things in the chat. Nikki Beleza has indicated that Fairfax Water's Water Supply Stakeholder Grant Program is available and accepting applications for education, water quality monitoring, source water protection, and shoreline stabilization projects until May 16th of 2022. And there's information in the chat about how to find an application. So we've got about 5 more weeks to get those applications in. And I have heard from a number of localities, local organizations, civic associations and so forth, that are quite happy with the Fairfax Waters Grant Program. So let's not leave that money in somebody's in the drawer. Let's make sure it gets used. So get those applications in. And then Elizabeth Ward has indicated, she's asked a question, should the updates to the comprehensive plan, so these I imagine you're talking about updates to various jurisdictions' comprehensive plan, be run through CAST scenario builder to formally consider the impact on meeting the WIP 3s. Interesting idea. Probably that question probably needs to go to some of our technical experts on staff, folks like Craig and others, so that we can, figure out if that is something that needs to be done. Of course, the comprehensive plans often are based on 30 or 40-year planning horizons. So meeting WIP 3s are going to be meeting the WIP 3 is a closer deadline, but that's a good question. Thank you. And Debbie Cross indicates Potomac Watershed Roundtable was created in 1999. Can you believe it's been over 20 years? Yes, I can believe it's been over 20 years. And I remember when Greg Evans first brought the concept to me and I said, I don't understand what you're talking about. But we got there. Anyone else wishing to have a comment or a question? I'm looking here to see if there's anybody
Chairman
else.
Adria is back.
Oh, Adria, thank you. Yes, I had called on you and we couldn't hear you. I wanted to ask you if you had any update from Extension or on any Extension programs or anything you'd like to tell us.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sorry, I was actually helping a member of our Soil and Water District staff with some supplies for our gardens. We have some wonderful partnerships going on with some of our community gardens projects, and one of them is working with the Soil and Water District with the National Association of Conservation Districts Urban Agriculture Grant, and I was meeting up with Stacy Evers, who is working with some of the gardens and just trying to put them together and make sure we have all the supplies. Additionally, I just thought that it might be fun to share a little bit, because this is all within this watershed. I don't know if you had any updates about our pesticide disposal from last fall, and I know it's already spring, but our pesticide disposal in Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria collected 10,395 pounds of unused, unwanted pesticides. And then in Haymarket, this is the Prince William and Loudoun Extension Office that hosted it. It was 7,364 pounds. I've been involved with this kind of program, and it runs every 5 years, and it's in collaboration with the VDACs and VCE work together. And I've been doing this for 4 cycles now. So every 5 years, 4 cycles. In my collections, just mine alone in Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria, we've collected over 30,000 pounds, which is really a lot to be proud of. We get good outreach, and yeah, absolutely.
Tons. Oh my goodness.
So we also, what was really great this time around, we partnered with the health department, and they helped us get out the word about vaccinations and gave out little goodie bags for people who brought things, hand sanitizer, masks, vaccination information. Because at the time, the least vaccinated group that the health department shared with me was males age 18 to 40, did not matter what demographics. And that was exactly the demographics that were coming, of course, mostly to drop off pesticides. So yeah, it was a great partnership. So thanks for the opportunity to give the update. I really appreciate it. And it's great to see you all today.
Thank you, Adria. Those are remarkable figures when you think about pesticides and keeping them out of our water streams, our water courses. That is just amazing. Getting the word out is one thing, but also we need that's good news to talk about, and get that information out to the public, not just that you're picking, that you can take it, but how much actually got kept out of our waterways. That's remarkable. Thank you.
I'll forward it along to you, to your office.
That'd be
happy
great
to share with anybody. Absolutely.
That would be great, especially as we're dealing right now with it's spring and people are getting out to do things like fertilizing their lawns and so forth. So that these are all the things that we need to be making sure people recognize that they haven't forgotten since last year when the information went out. You need to fertilize in the fall, if at all. So all right, thank you. Anyone else wanting to make any kind of comment? We have about 15 minutes left, but I am happy to give you 15 minutes of your day back if you wish. If there aren't any other questions, our next meeting is scheduled for July 1st, Friday, July 1st. That is prior to the 4th of July weekend, and it is not part of the holiday because the 4th of July is on a Monday, so that's the holiday. So we will plan to meet virtually again and then look at meeting in person, but the task force, of course, will come back with some ideas on that. I want to thank Willie Wood and Heather Shackley. This was Willie's first time being in charge, and you did just fine, Willie. Thank you very much. And Heather, thank you for making all the arrangements and taking all the notes for the minutes. With that, I will wish everybody a nice weekend. The sun is shining here in Fairfax County for a change, and hope that you will see you on July 1st. Please stay in touch with Willie or with me as you have thoughts about the roundtable. I really don't want to just leave it to, a few days before each meeting, because there are things we really should be doing, and we've gotten a lot of good ideas out of today's meeting. So with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Have a good weekend, everybody.